The night was cold, the kind that cut through every layer of fabric and skin, and left only silence and breath. The woman stood at the ranch door, her shawl pulled tight around her thin shoulders, her knuckles red as she knocked again. The sound echoed through the quiet plains. Inside, the baby's wails grew louder, and finally, the door creaked open. The man who stood there was broad-shouldered, weary, with eyes that had forgotten warmth. In his arms, a small child cried, face scrunched in hunger and fear. His shirt was half-buttoned, his hair disheveled, but his posture was straight as if duty alone held him up. She lowered her eyes respectfully. "Sir, I heard you might need help. I can cook, clean, do laundry, whatever you need. I just need a place to stay. Just until morning." He looked at her, suspicion flickering behind his tired gaze. "At midnight?" he asked, voice rough. Her lips trembled. There was nowhere else to go. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind howled through the open space, and the baby whimpered again. Something in that small sound softened the man's face. He stepped aside. "Come in," he said quietly. She entered the dimly lit cabin, her eyes scanning the worn furniture, the cold fireplace, and the bottle of milk sitting untouched beside a pot of boiling water. The baby squirmed in his arms. She instinctively reached out. "May I?" He hesitated, then nodded. The moment she took the child, the crying softened. She moved to the rocking chair near the hearth, began to hum softly, an old lullaby her mother once sang. The baby's sobs faded to soft breaths, then to sleep. The rancher stood silently, his jaw tightening as he watched her. "You're good with him," he finally said. "I was a nursemaid, before," she replied softly, eyes fixed on the small face resting in her arms. "Before what?" Her eyes clouded. "Before I lost everything." The silence between them grew heavy again. He crouched beside the fire, adding wood, his hands trembling slightly. "You can stay," he said finally, not looking at her. "I can't pay much. Haven't since my wife passed. But the baby needs someone." She nodded, her throat tight. "That's enough, sir." Days passed, and the ranch slowly came back to life. The woman rose before dawn, feeding the animals, baking bread, washing clothes. She never asked for more than what was given, just food, warmth, and silence. Yet her laughter, rare and quiet, began to fill the rooms again. The rancher watched her in small moments, how she smiled at the baby, how she hummed while working, how she stared out at the horizon as though searching for someone long gone. There was something about her presence that steadied him, the same way morning steadies the night. One evening, when the baby's fever broke after 3 sleepless nights, he found her sitting by the crib, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, her hands still gently patting the child's back. He sat beside her and whispered, "You saved him." She shook her head. "No, sir. He just needed love. That's something no medicine can replace." He turned to her, his eyes raw. "You sound like my wife." Her breath caught. She must have been kind. "She was," he said quietly. "And stubborn. Like you." Their eyes met in the flickering lamplight, two souls broken in different ways, yet somehow fitting together in the silence that followed. As winter deepened, so did the unspoken bond between them. She became part of the ranch, part of the child's laughter, part of his every breath. And though neither said it aloud, both knew that fate had not brought her to his door by accident that midnight. It had been mercy, quiet, unexpected, and written in the sound of a baby's cry. Spring crept slowly across the plains, melting the frost that had clung stubbornly to the earth. The air softened, birds returned to the skies, and with every sunrise, the ranch felt less like a house of grief and more like a home reborn. The woman, her name was Clara, moved through the days with quiet grace. She mended torn shirts, planted flowers along the porch, and sang softly as she worked. The baby, little Samuel, followed her voice like it was sunlight. He would giggle when she leaned close, his tiny hands reaching for her hair, his world wrapped around her presence. The rancher, Ethan, had not smiled in months before she came. His wife's death had hollowed him, left him with guilt he never spoke of and nights spent pacing by the fire. But now, when he watched Clara cradle Samuel or when she laughed softly at the table, something within him began to thaw. He found himself listening for her footsteps in the hall, watching for her figure against the fading light. Sometimes, she'd catch him looking, and he'd clear his throat, pretending to be busy. She'd smile faintly, as if she understood. One evening, a storm rolled in from the west. The wind howled across the land, shaking the shutters and rattling the roof. Ethan hurried to bring in the horses while Clara secured the windows. When he returned, soaked and breathless, he found her trying to calm Samuel, who was crying from the thunder. Ethan stepped forward, his rough hand brushing hers as they both reached for the baby. Their eyes met, just for a heartbeat, but the touch sent something deep through both of them. Together, they soothed the child until the storm began to fade, the thunder rolling farther and farther away. Later, when Samuel slept, Ethan stood by the fire drying his hair, watching Clara fold the baby's blanket. "You could have left that night," he said suddenly, voice low. "You didn't owe me anything." She looked up. "I had nowhere to go." He shook his head. "You could have gone anywhere. You're not the kind of woman meant to live in silence and dust." She gave a sad smile. "Silence is kinder than some memories." Ethan stared at her then, the lines of her face, the quiet strength in her eyes. "Who did you lose?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "My husband. And our boy. Fever took them both, one after the other. When I buried them, I thought I'd buried myself too." Ethan's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." She nodded. "So am I." The fire crackled between them, filling the room with the scent of pine and warmth. For the first time in years, Ethan reached out, not out of pity, but out of shared understanding, and took her hand. She didn't pull away. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving only stars. Inside, something new had begun, a fragile hope, born not from words, but from two broken hearts learning, slowly, to beat again.